Essentially, this talk is going to give an overview of a BMP that we developed over the past couple of years in response to a permit that the utilities were issued for routine maintenance activities on our rights-of-way. I'll give you a little background on NYPA. I'm fairly new here myself. I've only been here about 5+ years or so. Essentially, NYPA is a state-owned public utility. A lot of folks haven't heard of us unless we're in your backyard with a power plant or a transmission line. We don't send you bills. A lot of people know Con Edison, NYSEG, Central Hudson, the folks who essentially send you your bills. We're kind of the next level up. We sell them power and that sort of thing. So we're kind of in the background. We have 16 generating facilities, power plants around the state. Most of that power generation comes from hydro. We have some in-city plants that are gas-fired. We have 1,400 miles of transmission rights-of-way around the state, which is the focus of this presentation, and the permit that we received. And those rights-of-way around the state can vary in widths from 150 to 200, 300 feet wide based on the voltage of the lines and that sort of thing. Statewide, we're just one of the utilities out there in New York State, statewide, including NYSEG, Central Hudson, Con Edison, O&R, those folks, LIPA, et cetera. That's Long Island Power Authority. I think the number I received was roughly 17,000 miles of rights-of-way. Now, just to emphasize here, transmission and distribution are two different things. I'll have some pictures here in a few minutes, but transmission are those bigger lines, the big towers that are kind of out in more remote areas, not the distribution lines that run down your street or in the more urban-type settings. It's typically the bigger lines out in more rural areas. So back in 2010, NYPA was the first of the utilities to receive a permit from the DEC in regulated areas, wetlands and streams, that they have jurisdiction over to do maintenance activities on those lines. And that involves routine maintenance of the towers, inspections of the towers, and those sorts of things, and I'll show some pictures in a minute. So as part of that permit that we received, it covered a gamut of activities that we perform out there. If we have a piece of equipment that is going to cross a DEC-regulated wetland, which we all know is the 12+ acre size wetlands in the state, GIS system that I'm sure most of you are aware of. We have equipment crossing through there. We have access roads we need to do maintenance on. They've been blown out in a storm. Our culverts have been plugged up, those sorts of things. We need to get out there and do this work so that we can maintain the structures to keep the lights on. We have a vegetation management program as well where we go out routinely to make sure the tall growing species are not in the, quote, danger zone with the potential to strike a conductor, which is the wire that strings between the two towers, to cause a blackout. I think people remember the blackout, and I don't know, Carl, correct me if I'm wrong, 2003, somewhere back in there, that was caused by a tree. So there's a pretty aggressive program to reduce that or to minimize that in the future, which we can talk about. So those are basically the activities that we, in a nutshell, that we perform out there on the right-of-way to keep the towers intact and the power flowing. So this is a map of the New York Power Authority's transmission system, the red lines. So as you can see, we're spread out around the state. If you were to put the other utilities on there, there'd be a lot more lines, and that would be the 17,000 miles throughout the state. So as you can see, I don't know what the boundaries are of the prisms, but we cover most of them. Probably not Long Island, but the rest of them. So it's a pretty diverse landscape that we cover. I guess from an invasive species standpoint, there could be different species of concerns, obviously, in one region and not in the other. So I just wanted to give you a sense of where our lines are and the amount of area and ground that we cover. Here's an example of two of our rights-of-way. And on the top right, I believe our assistant forester, Mr. Lou Payne, that some of you might know. This was a great shot, obviously, of some lovely purple loosestrife growing in a wetland down there. And it gives you the, just a sense of the diversity of species that are out there. And then on the left is just another view of different types of structures and species on that right away. Here's another view coming out of our facility out near Utica. It's called our Marcy South line. It just gives you the sense of, the reason why I put this up is it gives you the sense of the number of structures that are out there. This is just 1 mile or so segment looking down the right-of-way. You have some agricultural fields that intersect the right-of-way. It's a compatible use that's allowed. You have shrub-type habitat, wetlands, roads. But all these towers need to be inspected routinely. All the bolts need to be, ensure that, the bolts are tight and the rust isn't too bad and that sort of thing. So you need to get to all these towers, you need to inspect them, you need to make sure that they're not going to fall down. Here's an example of our tree trimming operations. One of our tree contractors, I believe this one's Lewis Tree, they're doing some edge work. Oftentimes we'll have a maintained right-of-way. You've seen those corridors in the previous pictures. Oftentimes there's trees on the side that have the potential to maybe fall in. They're called danger trees outside of our right-of-way, or we have trees along the edge of that right-of-way. They're just going to try to trim those back so those branches don't become a concern to us. So that's just an example of a type of equipment that's out there, the tires that are there, just to give you a sense of that. So back to our permit. So that's an idea of some of the types of activities we do. And in the permit, there was, with the DEC, the central office, working with Betsy Hohenstein, I believe, and some other folks there, they developed a permit that kind of covered the gamut of natural resource protections. Everything from teeny species to wetlands to stream crossings. If we're going to be working in a regulated stream and having to do some work on a road or replace a culvert, there might be some prohibition period in there for spawning seasons and those sorts of things. And so this permit covers that in those DEC regulated areas. Now the focus of this presentation, so that's just a little background. Another condition of the permit, which was a big condition and which led to the development of this BMP, was to prevent the transport of invasive species off of the right-of-way. And in there, DEC was looking to us to either develop a plan to deal with this issue and come up with some interim measures, and that's what we'll get into. So some of the interim measures we came up with is we really wanted to start educating our workers about invasive species and what we can do to help prevent the transport of some of these species off of the right-of-way. What activities out there are really going to trigger this? We get into some muddy areas. You get a bunch of stuff on the vehicles, the heavy equipment. What can we do to clean those vehicles? What's practical from a cost standpoint, from a timing standpoint? What's really going to happen out there? And what are some other methods that we could come up with, perhaps preventative, that sort of thing that could at least demonstrate that we're making an attempt to be part of the solution out there. So I think at this point, Carl, I think you're online. Carl Schober, I'll let him do his own introductions, but he represents the Environmental Energy Alliance of New York. And so that's a group in New York State. It's a collection of utilities that meet on a regular basis to focus and discuss various environmental issues. And all the other utilities in New York State started to get the same permit we had, and they had to deal with the same invasive species issue on the right-of-way. So we thought it was a good idea to reach out to ENE and reach out to the other utilities and develop a statewide plan that's consistent across the state that everyone was happy with, And so I'll turn it over to Carl for a couple of slides, and he can speak for a few minutes on ENI and what their role was in the timeline on how we developed this BMP. You there, Carl? I think we lost Carl. Okay, anyhow, I guess I'll just continue. I don't want to hold things up here.
Carl's there now.
Oh. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Can you guys hear me now? Oh, yes. Sorry. Okay. I don't know. I had my phone off mute, but maybe the computer was on mute somehow. Anyway, well, Jeff gave a nice introduction to what ENI is all about and how ENI participated in this. Just a real quick intro. Carl Schoberl. I worked for many years in the utility. I was actually with Central Hudson Gas and Electric for a long time, and I now am with the Environmental Energy Alliance of New York. And ENI is all about trying to just facilitate dialogue and, you know, when issues like this come up where it really affects the statewide, the utilities statewide, you know, what ENI tries to do is, you know, provide that ability to facilitate the dialogue with the agencies, whether it's the New York State DEC, Public Service Commission, or whoever it might be, you know, so that we can come up with good balanced approaches that, you know, have desirable environmental benefits and don't break the bank for New York's ratepayers as well. So basically, this is a great example of an issue that really affects utilities statewide. So as Jeff said, New York Power Authority came to ENI, and I think at the same time, some of the other utilities had, you know, similar permit conditions, and you know, we basically, as indicated on the slides, formed a committee within ENI and kind of got the key folks together who were really the folks that had the most stake in this, and had a series of meetings with DEC, Public Service Commission representatives, a couple of representatives from each of the companies, both on the environmental and permitting side, as well as some of the vegetation management folks from each company. Jeff, I guess you've got the control if you want to flip to the next slide. Great. So, you know, basically, I guess this issue came up sometime in 2009, perhaps even a little earlier for some of the companies. You know, I'm not going to go into great detail here, but the key point is that this was really a good iterative effort among all the stakeholders and really good collaboration among, you know, DEC, PSC, all of the utilities. And so a series of meetings were held, you know, beginning in 2010 and working through 2010 and 11, ended up, you know, going through various iterations of the BMP. And then in early 2012, consensus was more or less reached on the invasive species BMP, and you know, it was basically just about a year ago finalized. Should I go to the next slide, Jeff? I think I just have one more slide, and then I'll turn it back to Jeff. But again, just real quickly, you know, the goal, as I kind of mentioned a few moments ago, was to come up with practical approaches and cost-effective approaches for inspecting and you know, dealing with the potential for spread of invasive species during the course of utility work on the rights of way. You know, the document incorporates definitions and, you know, where the BMP is relevant, and it outlines, you know, certain preventative measures, avoidance techniques, cleaning techniques, and then you know, a little bit on stabilization, site restoration. You know, one of the key things, key elements of it is education and training, environmental awareness, making sure crews are aware of the implications of the work that they're doing, so that, you know, there can be some, you know, behavioral changes or approaches to take that will help to mitigate the spread of invasive species. And that's really it. Just wanted to provide a couple thoughts on the statewide perspective. And Jeff, I think you were going to take it over at the next slide.
Great. Thanks, Carl. And Leslie, you jump in anytime you want. I mean, obviously, Leslie, the Invasive Species, Leslie, the Invasive Species Program at DEC, she was involved in all of those meetings representing the department, and just be happy to jump in at any time, Leslie. So,
hey,
now, as part of that BMP, it's essentially a document. It has some appendices to it, and two of the appendices, one I think Leslie really liked was a flow chart. It was real simple. We tried to actually, we printed this out, we laminated it, put it in the crew's trucks so they could reference. I mean, the bottom line is, if you're leaving a public highway, if you're leaving a right-of-way access road, is there dirt, debris, plant material clinging to, your tools, your boots, the equipment itself, or the machinery, then that's going to trigger a cleaning activity. It's pretty basic, but it's just an actual flow chart in there where with some of these guys, sometimes they need a little hand holding on when this thing's going to apply or not. The other thing that came part of the permit itself was I believe in the permit that we got back in 2010, it was an interim list of invasive plant species in New York State. There were 70 or 70 plus species on the list. I think talking with Leslie the other day, it's more of a guidance list at this point. It's not interim. But whatever it is, there's a lot of plants on that list, and they're real difficult to identify. Oftentimes, botanists can't even identify them. And that was one of the challenges we faced, and one of the things we went back and forth on in a lot of the meetings is being able to identify these species and knowing when it's cleaning, when you're in one of those areas or not. Oftentimes that's difficult. Now, obviously, some of the dominants, it's pretty easy. Regulated areas, everyone knows what Phragmites looks like for the most part. But you got to remember, we're all biologists for the most part and in the environmental field, and we have line crews out there that aren't necessarily educated or trained in this thing, so they might not know when they're in those areas. So, what we really wanted to do was try to change practices across the board and not emphasize being able to identify all these different species, because it's just really not practical or possible for our contractors out there, but get them to incorporate certain cleaning practices or avoidance measures without having to learn all these different species.
Jeff, this is
one
Leslie.
Example, the observation I made in the field, we have some ATVs, gator-type vehicles, and we have trucks that, traverse the right-of-way, and they have winches on the front. And I was out there one day watching the crew, and I noticed with the winches on the front and the cable that's in there, it just really seemed to be a magnet for seeds and plant material. I don't know if it was invasive seeds or not, but whatever it was, a real simple measure, preventative measure, would be to put a canvas cover over it or even a garbage bag. So they improvised on the fly, and they were able to just pull a contractor garbage bag out of the back of the truck and just kind of taped it over that thing, and that was a pretty quick and dirty measure to avoid getting plants in the winch. Here's another nice shot of one of our rights-of-way and our roads. We have a pretty well-established maintenance road system that was developed during the installation of these lines many years ago, and so the key is to encourage and emphasize the importance of staying on those roads and not driving all over the place when you're out there. I can't speak for the other utilities on the amount of roads that are on their rights of way, but I know for NYPA we have a pretty well established road system out there for getting to all of the different structures, not entirely, but for the most part. So the key thing here is to stay on the road. Here's another nice shot. This is a good shot too. It kind of shows some of the diversity of species out there. Oftentimes utilities get blamed or get in trouble for or get perceived as just kind of scorching the landscape and just kind of clear-cutting the right-of-way. It's really not the case out there. We employ what's called an integrated vegetation management program where we're really just targeting tall-growing hardwood-type trees that are going to grow into the conductor and cause an outage in the state. So we're trying to encourage native-growing shrubs, native-growing species to, I guess in a lot of ways that would discourage invasives from moving in, and it would also help maintain some biodiversity out there and habitat value. This is another measure that we employed. Lou Payne, who's our assistant forester, some of you might know, we were at a conference out in Wisconsin, and this is basically just a hoof brush for horses, and it was just a great little tool for cleaning your boots. So we purchased, I don't know, 100 or so of these and handed them out to our crews. They have them in their truck, and it's just a quick little thing they can clean off their boots and other equipment that they might have before they get into the truck. Another part of our educational program, that's Lou with some of the DEC staff, is education and getting out to the rights-of-way and trying to understand what we do out there and why we do it and what the landscape's like. And you can read these documents, you can read policy, you can do all these sorts of things, develop documents, but unless you get out there and look at some of this stuff, I don't think you truly understand it unless you do that. And so we went out for some site visits with the regulators as to kind of further our educational program. Here's another fact sheet that we developed in collaboration with SUNY ESF in the state, and this was handed out to the crews. Kind of gives an overview of non-native invasive plants and how they interact on the rights-of-way. You could read this at a later date, but it's just another educational tool that we developed. Some of the challenges on the right-of-way. Oftentimes, people think that the utilities own the land out there, and really we don't. I mean, at least NYPA, for the most part, does not. We have easements along those rights-of-way to maintain the corridor to allow for the transmission of power, but we don't own the land. It's some private landowner, and we just have an easement through there. So there's all sorts of other users out there, trespassers, ATVs, snowmobiles, hunters, those sorts of things. So we're only one of the users out there on the right-of-way, and we have a limited control of it. But we're trying to do our part to help with this issue. So kind of moving forward, beyond the BMP and into the future, we have a current research project going on with the Electric Power Research Institute. We, NYPA, Con Ed, and Central Hudson are members of this organization, and we basically meet on a regular basis and develop or come up with ideas that electric utilities are facing, if it's a right-of-way or at a power plant. It could be anything from fish passage through a dam to maintaining vegetation on a right-of-way. And so that issue came up, and working with SUNY ESF, we're trying to understand and learn more about the costs and effectiveness of the cleaning techniques. One of the things the DEC was looking for us to do originally was power washing of equipment. And so we've kind of come off of that a bit just from a practical standpoint, but we're going to look at this now in a research study to see how practical it is, how cost effective or ineffective might it be, and I'll get into the details of this study a bit. And then we'll also be able to, through this study, develop an ID book of some of the various invasive plants in their growth stages. So this is some of SUNY ESF. We're working with Chris Nowak, who is a professor and a researcher at SUNY ESF. We've worked with him for years doing vegetation assessments on rights-of-way and utility work. So here's an example of power washing, an ATV obviously, and what they're going to do is they're going to try to collect all the material that comes off of there. They're going to have students kind of trailing behind crews that are out there doing work or doing inspections with GPS, so they're going to get a sense of the movements that they're doing out there, and then they're going to try to come back at the end of the day and collect what kind of material is actually on that vehicle at the end of the day, off on the edge of the right-of-way. So then they're going to also collect by mechanical means, using shovels and brushes, and bring this material back to some of the SUNY greenhouses to propagate them. The blue tarp here, just to show you how you learn from your mistakes, this was just some Walmart-type tarp that they bought, and when they drove out onto it, it just ripped it to shreds with a piece of equipment, ripped it to shreds. So the previous slide, this one tarp was a heavy-duty tarp that cost, I think Chris said, maybe over $1,000 or something to get enough of this material for their study, so it was pretty expensive. But in order to do the study, they needed a better tarp. And then this is just another picture of one of the guys in his crew back in, from the material that they've collected from the right-of-way and in the greenhouse, and they're going to keep track of what actually grows from that material. And, some of it might not even be invasive, some of it may be. We'll get a better sense of what some of these vehicles are picking up when they're out there in the field. And the other important thing that I know a lot of the utilities were concerned about is, the cost and the time involved in doing some of these cleaning practices, and so they're going to keep track of that as well. So this is about a 4-year study or so, and so hopefully this will help guide future, regulations and thinking into, what's practical out there. And that's the end of my presentation.